Did you hear that? It said recording in
I
progress.
did.
Fancy. Welcome to i2eYe, where we discuss the concept of perspective. We share our points of view and reflect on the direction, momentum, and integrity of the physics of our environment. So my name is Matt. Welcome. I also
Lana.
have, here we go, we got Lana with us. So what I want to do is I want to bring up the concept of perspective. I think it's something that is lacking in focus and attention. And I think by redefining it, we can understand better our mindsets and the world that we live in. And I couldn't think of anyone else I'd rather do that right now than with Lana, with the creative mind that inspired me to probably keep going with this little idea of mine.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think it's because we both think about the same thing, but we look at it from different angles, which is where the perspective comes in. Do you want to talk about how we crossed paths?
Sure. So I was minding my own business and living my life. I was very happy and fulfilled and excited with a bright future ahead. And I was looking for a little bit clearer direction. And I had a feeling for a long time that things could and should be different. And I didn't know how to express that. And I was exploring that during the COVID and the pandemic. And I knew what I felt, but I didn't know if anyone else could truly relate to how I felt, because when I expressed it so many times, other people didn't understand, or I felt a discomfort, which, you know, it was more of their discomfort, which made me uncomfortable. So I didn't know how I could relate to people and make a connection through how I feel things could be different and not insulting other people who don't see it the same way. And I just thought I was all alone until I walked into a store and it was like a spotlight, and I heard a symphony almost. And I saw this beautiful painting with these beautiful hexagons and this beautiful woman behind, and there was these waves in front, and it was this energy, and it was this deeper understanding of physics in a way that if I had to describe someone to draw how I feel many times, they would have painted this painting, but not even close to as accurate as anything I could have ever described. And it honestly, it blew me away. It was one of those moments I'll never forget when I saw that painting. And it wasn't just that painting. I saw that one, I related to it. And then I looked and there was 4 or 5 paintings, and they all related to different aspects of the sense of change that I couldn't describe in words. And it blew me away. And it took me a couple days to process, to be honest, before I even thought about reaching out. So I would love to hear about that painting and yourself. And I honestly, I'd love to hear more about you, because I don't know if we would be here with i2eYe without you. And so the chances of that happening are so slim that I think it's important that people hear how unlikely those events were to happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like the most interesting thing about it is the fact that that painting almost didn't happen, because when I was working on it, I was struggling so much, and I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. This is not happening the way that I envisioned it. And I almost gave up on it. And at one point when I was close to finishing it, I was ready to just gesso over it and do a completely different painting. And there was some inexplicable urge to just finish it. Like, even if it's absolute garbage, even if you don't show it to the world, just finish it and just get this out of your system.
Do you feel that way for all your paintings?
No. Like this was, that's why like this one was so interesting, is because it was very much a struggle. But like the thing that I've noticed is the paintings that are the biggest struggle often end up being my best works. And so that's the thing about this one, is like I almost didn't finish it because it wasn't working. And then I finished it. And even when I did, I was like, I don't know about this. And I sat on it, and I think I posted it on social media just to be like, maybe I need an outside opinion. And everybody loves that piece. Like, it's just everybody, like, it resonates with everyone on a level that I did not expect. And that's what I mean when I say like this inexplicable urge of like, this thing needs to exist. I don't know why, but it needs to happen. It needs to be in this reality because it's going to mean something to someone, even if you don't understand it. And that's the really interesting thing about our collaboration, is that I come at it from a very abstract point of view, where it's like, I create things and the images come to me and the symbolism comes to me before the understanding does. And I don't have the words to articulate it. And I don't fully even know what message I'm creating when I'm painting until I'm like halfway through a painting. And then it starts to clue in, and I'm like, oh, right, this is because of this. And then like all of those subconscious thoughts rush in, like while you're working on it. It's almost like when you're creating something, you're taking those abstract thoughts and making something tangible so that you can see it in front of you and it makes more sense. But the reason I love working with you is because you have the words, like you have the science background, you have the ability to articulate all of those abstract ideas.
Yeah, at least like I think everybody has an expressive sense. They just don't exercise it, and it's often an uncomfortable feeling to express something that is deep down, whether they call it imagination or subconscious or deep in your perspective, where it's something that doesn't exist in the outside world, or there isn't something that completely relates or says it word for word, or there is no image that you feel inside. I think everybody has that kind of space, and how we use it and why is what kind of shapes who we are, I feel, and much of our mindset and our hopes and dreams. So where I feel very similar when I get those kind of like introspection images. And what I do with those images is, as opposed to other people like yourself who have the ability to paint that I do not have, because I could never come close to putting down what I'm seeing or feeling on paper, and I wish I could. I'm very envious of that. What I do,
but you
is,
do with words,
yeah,
which is something I can't do.
Which is something I only recently started doing, because a lot of people too is like, if you just start writing things you're thinking about, now they call it a diary and stuff, but I don't know if I was never comfortable with that as a kid, and I see the benefits to the diary. But what I learned to do, and again, this is just me, and this is and I just didn't learn to express it till recently, was all those feelings and all those images that that I would see in my dreams, or I would feel, and such. I would I would start to throw my memories into those kind of scenes, and I started to realize it was more of like my imagination was more of like a different kind of physics. It was a way for me to reflect on the world around me and who I was. And I was just scared to do that for most of my life, because if you kind of let go to your imagination into this kind of a blender of all of the information that you've been through and your feelings, you don't know what's going to come out, right? And whether I was too young to understand it, too young to see what my imagination wanted me to see, whatever people want to think about it, everybody's got a different interpretation for it. And it's being afraid of that, and being afraid to acknowledge that and express that. I felt my whole life, and it only made me, the more I express it, the more I realize that's how I relate to people even more than I used to. I used to say no one could relate to my struggles, and I've realized that my struggles, it's not so other people relate to me, it's so that I relate to other people. And so all the things I used to hate in my life, all those things that used to bother me and weigh me down, I learned to reevaluate. And all the things I used to
Mhm.
love about myself and the things I used to be thankful for and appreciate, and I began to reevaluate that too. And when you start to do that on your own without the effect of peer pressure and what other people want in their own self-interest, you start to see things a little differently. And I start to realize like my imagination was my sense of why, my sense of discovery, my sense of growth and of evolution. And I just was never told that's what it was. It was a tool that I applied to make me happier as opposed to making me healthier and better and brighter. And
Learning
yeah,
about yourself.
yeah. And so when I saw your paintings, I was like, okay, those are the remind me of all of the kind of physics that I used to apply, or I not used to, that I used to feel but not see and understand until I was open to feeling them honestly. And my words are a reflection of many of the images and the themes that you paint about. And so it was one of those things
Mhm.
I came to realize. I was like, the only way she could paint these things, and it wasn't just that painting. I went to your website and there was all of your paintings. The only way that she could paint these things and title them the way that you did is if you felt that kind of insight as well, that other people
Mhm.
either don't feel or stopped feeling and suppressed, or they're just afraid to express them and try to make sense of them. And so um, then so here's the thing too, is once I saw your art, I started looking at other art, and I began to look at other artists throughout history. And that's when I started to fall in love with like Van Gogh and Da Vinci. And I realized that these people who they called Renaissance painters and these geniuses and creativity people were all just people that were trying to express a different mindset and a different view of the world. And
Mhm.
you opened my focus in ways that I never cared about art before. I cared about entertainment, but I
Mhm.
just wanted to laugh and I wanted to be entertained. I didn't really care about what they were expressing or trying to say, so I couldn't care less. And now, the more I look back, the more I relate to these people in a way that I relate more to them than I do to a lot of the people I grew up with and some of my best friends I had my whole life. And that's
Right.
something I believe is priceless, priceless.
Yeah. And it's interesting though, because like I very much use painting as a tool for introspection, where like I do it without even realizing. It's just this innate need to do this thing where it's like it's very like it's the physical act of painting. Like one of the reasons I couldn't get into digital art is because it doesn't feel the same way as mixing your own paints on a palette and like putting a brush to a canvas and like all of the like little mistakes that happen, like the organic process. And there's something about the process where it just feels like you're speaking to your subconscious mind on a level that transcends language. And I think that's why it resonates, because we're having the same conversation. It's just I'm better at painting about it than I am using words, and you're very articulate. And even like the recent stuff you've been writing has been like, yes, this is exactly it, like this is what I'm thinking, but I can't quite put into words. So that's where, and this is why I love collaborating with people who work in different mediums, because for me, like the biggest source of inspiration has always been music. It's been people who can take those thoughts and ideas and put them into lyrics that are just like, yes, this is like, that's it. That's what I was trying to represent visually. And so it's like,
Yeah.
it's just so cool how we're influenced by different forms of expression. And it's almost like everyone has their own little puzzle piece to the bigger picture. And when we bring it all together, we're like, yes, this is it.
Exactly. And that's why I feel like we all have that different, these little bit slightly different angles of looking at the same thing. And the more we try to convince other people that our little angle is right, um, the more we lose the ability to shift and see the world from other people's points of view. So what I found, what I'm starting to realize that the more I kind of boil down all these thoughts and feelings and concepts and the new kind of values and principles that I've come to discover, is I realize that it really is about taking this, your own self-interest out of the equation. And then whatever comes up is usually in your best self-interest anyway. Just, it's hard to see it at the time. And so think about like when I decided I'm going to pursue this exploration of perspective as not just my passion, my hobby, but as my career. And a lot of people told me that I was crazy. And, you know, because in their mind, you have to go get a paycheck and you need to always be earning, regardless of how much I had saved and the sacrifice that I had made before. People still kind of, Matt, are you crazy? Don't you want to, like, I guess my story will come out over the course of more of these episodes, but I was a flight coordinator and an air traffic controller. And I've come to realize that there are many jobs out there, and often it is based on our own self-interest at the time. And by putting my self-interest aside and thinking, what about this feeling I have feels like I can express something that other people are trying to express. Maybe that, even though like my own career, my own, you know, company, that kind of stuff is a good thing for my own self-interest, I'm not doing it out of self-interest. If I only thought about that first, I would just be getting a paycheck because that was technically easier and less vulnerable. And so what I've recognized in like your painting and then getting to know you is when you share your stories about art school and how you felt in art school, and what they did is they were I see it as, and I did the same thing in my education, is they were teaching me how to best apply my self-interest. And it's usually about making money and security and stuff like that. And my security was never financial. My needs, my insecurity was never financial. It was more of something deeper. But if people don't understand that kind of deeper desire, they will encourage you to try to follow your self-interest deeper and deeper and deeper. And when I saw your art, and you talk about how hard it is to be an artist, especially at first when you're painting things that other people don't paint, I see that as someone who puts their own self-interest aside for a greater feeling, even though you don't know what it is yet. And that is something that is, you have this greater objective, this greater sense of who you are and who you want to become than just filling your insecurities at the time. And the more we focus on our insecurities in the moment, the further we will get from feeling secure later on, I believe. I don't know. I rambled on for that.
It's interesting that you say that, because like I never thought about it that way. Like I never thought I was putting my own self-interest aside for the greater cause. I always thought that it was about self-interest, because I'm like, I'm just painting the things that I think are interesting, and I'm not painting the things that are going to make me money, because those things are boring. And it's almost like with most projects, like the ones that I don't think about or like do too much reflecting, like the impromptu ones that just happen, it's almost like this innate drive of like, I have something in me that I need to get out, and I need to get it out of me right now in this form of expression, like whether it's painting, or like if you're a musician and you have to write a song, or like you have to get out a poem or something. It's like you have these moments of like, I have this thing and I need to put it out, and it's not for any reason other than like I just got to get it out of my system. And those often end up being like the most, like the works of art that resonate with the most people, because they're speaking on a language that is universal, that everyone can understand. And it's like, yes, you're saying the thing that I'm feeling. And that's what's so interesting about it. It's almost like the title of the piece we're talking about is Hive Mind. And it's almost like it is this hive mind of like, we're all connected to this idea, but we're coming at it from our own perspective, and we're talking about it in our own way. And so like when someone says it in whatever medium that resonates with you, it's like like when you hear it in a song, it's like, yes, that's the thing that I was thinking about. You put it perfectly. Or if you see it in a painting and you're like, yeah, exactly that. It's,
Yeah.
I don't know how to
Well,
express it, but it's just like, it's this weird thing where it's like, I didn't set out to say a specific thing or to like create a grand gesture that was going to speak to a lot of people. I just painted the thing that came to mind because I had to.
right. But that in itself, so it's hard to understand, if, let's say, you've always felt that way. It's hard to understand what it's like to not feel that way, and vice versa. So I think for me, it was always this feeling similar to that, but I suppressed it. I was, in a, very masculine, toxic environment for most of my childhood and adolescence and such, where the tough men, those kind of people, everybody looked up to, and it was a different world back then. And I think it was something that made me resent myself in that feeling of expression, because what I wanted to express was the opposite of what other was the opposite of the self-interest of the people in the environment I grew up in. And so I was embarrassed by seeing the world differently. So I suppressed that, and I didn't want to express it. And it made me, anytime I felt that feeling, I thought of it as a bad thing. And like maybe there's something wrong with me. And I think there's a lot of people that can relate to that as well. But what I've come to realize is, so when you say like that feeling where like, oh, they're saying something that I felt, or I find the brighter my perspective is, the more I understand myself, the more I relate to people in ways I never could have imagined. And I find these moments are happening of I get what they're going through, and I get what they're going through. The only time I don't, I find now, is when it's not honest. And so I feel like when someone's being honest with themselves and they're being vulnerable, I immediately recognize that as strength, and I feel it, because that's what changed my life around, was realizing and reevaluating my vulnerabilities. So I see people as the ones that are still defined by those, and the people that are redefining them. And so that feeling of like, I got to get something out, and that real excitement feeling, the more I explore this and the concept of my perspective, or just general perspective and my point of view, the more I can separate those two, I find I get that feeling now just getting out of bed, because everything that happens throughout the day is a way that I can measure and evaluate and reevaluate, and experiences that I go through just provide more information for this deepening of my perspective. So I get out of the morning and I feel like I'm going to paint a beautiful painting that day. And no matter what happens, I go to bed and I'm smiling, because I know that I'm going to go to sleep, and in the morning, I'm going to be excited to do the same thing again. And I find that is infectious in a way that I couldn't, like, that feeling is something that I want to share with the world. Not, this is how I feel, it's this is how you could feel. And that feeling is priceless. And no matter how much money I made, or the stuff I bought, and the cars, and the all of that superficial bullshit that used to make me happy and feel comfortable, and it was just ways that I used to measure my insecurity with other people. You realize that if you're measuring your level of insecurity compared to other people, and that makes you feel good, that means that you're still in that place of insecurity. And once you realize that that place of insecurity is something that you need to learn how to understand, that's that feeling of walking on water. Because you're not actually walking on water. You just feel that all that current that was dragging you down from your insecurities and the peer pressure.
Flow.
Right. You don't feel peer pressure anymore, because you realize peer pressure is just other people's self-interest conflicting with your own. And when you take both your self-interest and the other people's self-interest out of it, and you realize there's a space in the middle, and it's beautiful there. And that, again, not a metaphor, and all of it, but that's how I see as that was a visual painting of my imagination while we're discussing it. And to some people that might make sense, to other people that might not make sense and sound crazy. But to the people that think it sounds crazy, um, I hope you can open your mind before it's too late. For what that's worth.
Well said.
For what
No, but
that's
I
worth.
think it's interesting because like there's an irony to it all, because we try so hard to be a certain thing or be a certain way to fit into a community because we want to have that sense of belonging, to be a part of something. But like the moment that you say, fuck it, I'm just going to be myself, I'm just going to be my most authentic me, that's when you actually find the people who appreciate all of those authentic parts of you and who actually like you for who you are and not for what you're trying to be. That's when you find that sense of belonging, and it's a more honest, it like
Right.
I hate reusing the word authenticity so much, but like that's what it is. It's just like it is the truth of the matter. It's like you are living in your truth, and that's why you feel fulfilled. That's why you get excited to wake up in the morning, and when you go to bed you're like, oh, I get to do it all over again the next day, because you are being you, like you're living as yourself. You're doing the things that bring you joy, that bring you fulfillment, because you're being honest with yourself. And you can't be honest with yourself if you're trying to be a certain way to fit into a certain group, to a certain community that's been like synthetically constructed to portray success or whatever it is. Like it's not real. Like when you're living in your truth, you're being real with yourself. You're living your actual life, and that's why it feels good. When you're trying to be something you're not, it doesn't fit right. Like you're wearing clothes that don't fit you, and that's why it's uncomfortable. That's why you have that sense of like, this isn't it.
When I was at my most popular, I was the least myself, and I was the least happiest. I was anxious because it was an act, and I was so considerate of what I said and how I said it. And then I would review nonstop of, okay, did I say that right? Did they think I was stupid? All this bullshit, because I wasn't acting myself. And it was from a place of insecurity. And I went above and beyond to consider how other people would value me as opposed to how I would value me. And I would rather have 10 people in my life that appreciate me for who I am and for my uniqueness than have a million people love me for being shallow,
Mm-hmm.
And I see there's so many people that seem so disillusioned later in life. And I think it's because they began to define themselves how other people value them and define them. And it's almost impossible to keep up. If you define yourself and your value by how attractive you are, what happens when your skin starts to loosen and things don't look the same? And you see people who overvalue that, and then they can never recover from that. They've got that mindset. Every time they look in the mirror, they don't see themselves anymore. They see who they used to be and who they've become now. And it makes them sad. People that value, their big house that they bought. Well, 10 years later, that house isn't the same thing it was. And all these new houses with new construction are coming up. And now they feel less valued because their house isn't impressive to anyone else. Their cars, their pools. The world changes. Technology changes.
Values.
Right. So what I do is everything I was proud of, I'm proud of today. I like to look at it this way: is everything like material and all this stuff that I'm proud of, would I be proud of those same things if I lived 100 years ago or if I lived 100 years later? And I find the technology and all this stuff, why do I have to buy it if it's temporary? And it doesn't make me feel cool because I have stuff, because I didn't build it, I didn't make it, I just bought it. And people buy gadgets to define themselves with it, and it just never made sense to me. And same thing with products and all these things, that people chase these things that are valuable in the moment. And the same thing with traditions, the same thing with the values of a country, right? So like people define themselves by the country they come from and the values of that country, as opposed to their own themselves. And so as people value country's values less, they take that and are insulted by that. They're defined by their stories and their myths and their legends and their generations of genes and roots, right? And all those roots and everything that came before it values more than anything that could come after it. And that is one of the saddest things I could ever think about. And so when I put myself in other people's perspectives using my imagination, and I can try to feel what it's like to feel the pressures that they feel every day, and to imagine what that kind of pressure of time and space like that, of being behind the times, I couldn't imagine what that must feel like. Losing value every day, losing relatability every day, getting smaller and smaller comfort zones, and feeling less and less themselves. Or I don't know how I could just go on and thinking like what that must feel like, compared to waking up every day excited to being a better person, not trying to make the person who used to be a better person. Yeah.
Well, I think it's also like a lot of people just don't know themselves because they've either not had the time or opportunity to get to know themselves, because we live in a society where it's like you're just constantly working, you're expected to be places, to be doing things. Like no one says, hey, take the time to just self-reflect and introspect. And I think when it comes to placing so much of your identity in your roots, or like where you come from, like identity, all of that, it gives people an anchor of like, well, this is my identity. And I think part of that is just because you haven't taken the time to really think about like who you are, essentially, like who you are. Because like, yeah, your roots do play a part, like they play a huge part, because that's your foundation. That's like, we all grew up in a certain culture with certain parents, guardians, like we all grew up in circumstances that shaped who we are. But ultimately your identity is you in any given moment and what you're choosing to do. So you shape your identity as you live. Like right now, you and I are shaping our identity just by having this conversation and like thinking about our opinions. So I think like there is an important element to respecting your roots and where you come from, but it's ultimately recognizing that you are the one who writes your story. So you can take aspects of that, but don't necessarily make it everything about you, because you're still writing that story and that story doesn't end and it changes.
I agree and also slightly disagree. The only thing I would say I disagree on is necessarily that you're in control of your own story and that you get to write your own story. Because I believe that the narrative of your story, or for most people, it's written for them by the environment they're in. And so I find every person doesn't get to choose their state of their time and place in those pressures, the environment that they're placed in. So you don't get to choose whether you're the oldest, middle child, youngest, only child, etc., whether your family's together or not. And that's what kids struggle with at the beginning, because they feel like they should. And they do, which is why they're so hard on themselves when things don't work out, or when there's pressure. But I think deciding that the beginning of your life is only the first half of the story, and the only time it changes from that first half and that second half is when you realize that the first half is only there to help you relate to other people. It's not to make you better than anyone else. It's not to make you different. It's to make you the exact same. The fact that your story is different halfway is what you realize makes you exactly like everybody else. And then you get to choose. You're like, I'm not. So for me, my perspective has nothing to do with the color of my skin. My perspective has nothing to do with my sex or gender. It has nothing to do with anything I like personally. My perspective is completely removed from my self-interest and how much money I make and all of these other things. My private life is private, and there's a value to that, but that has little to do with my perspective and everything to do with how I relate to other people. And so there was me born given a name, friends, family, all of that stuff. And I never got to choose that narrative. The only thing I got to choose was whether that mattered to my perspective or it didn't. And by realizing none of that stuff ultimately matters, that's when I got to change the rest of my story. And so when people say, well, Matt, how can you say the stuff you do? I'll say, because I took my self-interest out of it. And so until you reach that point, or until until anybody reaches that point of, this is what I believe because it's in my best self-interest. Once you realize it's not, that's where you reach that halfway point. Now anybody can choose what they want to do, because a lot of people, they're like, let's say their politics is grounded in what's best for them. And so when I look at someone's telling me their point of view, I'm like, of course, because that's in your self-interest. The people that have the choice are the people that say, you know what? Yeah, I'm white, and it's being harder and harder to benefit from being white, but I think that's what's best for everybody in the long run. That is one thing. For someone to say, I want racial equality because it's best for me, as in they will be looked at like they're kind and progressive. I think that's a whole different story. So I think that narrative of what is in your best interest plays the biggest factor for that first half. And then after that, it is none of that stuff matters. And you reach that epiphany, and none of that stuff has value except to give your perspective more value and more insight and more information. Yeah.
Yeah, I
one of
don't
those,
think
you're
it's always
dealt the cards. It's one of those, like, I was dealt the cards I was dealt, right? But that only helps you understand the game of poker. It's not whether you're good at it or not, it's whether you learn the game.
Right, but that's what I mean when I say like you write your own story. It's because like you can't decide what your circumstance is going to be, but you decide how you respond to your circumstance. So like I don't know that it's necessarily an epiphany for everyone. For some people, it's maybe like more of a progressive, like slowly learning and like slowly waking up to like who you are versus who you've been told to be. So like when I talk about like you get to write your own story, it's you're dealt with a certain hand, but it's up to you how you play that hand, and it's up to you how you learn to play that hand. So it's just about like it varies depending on how self-aware you are, how awake you are to your environment and how it shapes you and how it's affecting you. Because if you wake up to it and you see, oh, I'm in this circumstance, I've been raised by these people, I've been dealt this hand, this is what's expected of me based on these beliefs, you get to decide how you want to respond to that. Do you want to play into it, or do you want to veer off script and say, well, no, like I want to be this instead. I don't want to be shaped by my gender, by my ethnicity, by my background.
But that is a luxury that a lot of people don't have. A lot of people don't get to choose that, whether they agree or disagree. A lot of people don't have the option to be who they feel they could be, whether it's the pressures of everybody around them who will not accept them, who will abuse them, who will make their lives worse. Yeah. A lot of people make the choice, my life is better pretending to be someone else than it would be being myself. And that has a lot to do with the world around them. And so I think a lot of people don't have that choice. And for example, like I wasn't given the choice of my narrative. And in many ways, like the reason I had to kind of distance myself from my old comfort zone is because people had already defined Matt is this way. And a lot of it was because of the superficial things that they seen or what they wanted to see. They would see the things they wanted to see, not who I really was. And if I was in a room of 10 people and they all said, this is who Matt is, I was that person, regardless of if I was or not. And that's where my skin defined me. If I couldn't listen to the music that I liked because if it wasn't masculine enough, I was gay. And if it was too black, then where other people could listen to rap, I couldn't listen to rap because it would mean something different to them and they would make fun of me for it, or vice versa. I couldn't wear hoodies. I couldn't wear hoodies ever growing up because people would give me the most dirtiest looks ever. And it used to break my heart. And no matter what I did or anytime I tried to just be myself, I was looked down upon. And I looked around and everyone else was allowed to be themselves. I was the only one that wasn't, because they told me, Matt, you're not allowed to be this way. We already decided that people who look like you have to act this way. And so even to this day, it doesn't matter what I do, and it doesn't matter how far I go in life or how much I change, to the people I grew up around, I'm still that same person, because they've chosen that, because it's in their best self-interest. And they put me in a box. And then I had to learn to be comfortable in my little box, because I had no other option. It was either suffocate in that box or learn to live in it. And that's where I find the change happens, is when you realize I was made to be put in a small box. And often what happens is we find different boxes to fit in, as opposed to thinking outside the box, So it's like, okay, because I never saw the world the way other people did. I was raised with a single mother, so I was very empathetic. I was raised to have compassion and respect women, and I just couldn't help it, because I respected my mother, and I saw women on the same level. So it was hard for me, a lot of environments with all these men that were raised by other men that disrespected women, and these men I realize now, are terribly insecure. And so it just helped them in their self-interest, to demean women and put women down, but it always bothered me. And anytime I stood up for women, I was called a fag in the worst words, right? So I struggled with my own sense of my own sexuality, because the only thing less attractive to me than women was men. And so men were not an option, because men always grossed me out. The insecurity, the toxicity, the competition, all that shit. I found it repulsive, where I was more comfortable with women, but I wasn't like, I don't know. That's where there was a struggle. I was never gay. I was always attracted to women, but only because I was so disgusted by men. And so there was a pressure there to act a certain way. And I was made fun of because I would respect women, because I protected women in party atmospheres. And it's something that, kind of made me a bit of an outcast at times, and something that I never understood, but something I'm so thankful for today, because that was me discovering my sense of principles and values for myself. And I see that as a lot of people I know that have made some awful mistakes and will never admit to it, because they've hurt some people more than they'll ever admit. And those kind of people, all they do is say, well, you're not any better, because here's a narrative that I'm going to weave that's going to bring you down to a lower level. And I realized a lot of my environment is just people bringing people down to try to make themselves feel better, and say, everybody in this world is awful, so it's okay that I'm awful. Or it's okay in this scenario when it applies to me, but in any other scenario, it's not okay. And it's just when you look at it through the lens of self-interest, you realize this world is just a swamp of self-interest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I mean, I would argue that is you living your own narrative, because you did become that outcast, because you didn't start disrespecting women just because that's what was expected of you. You rebelled against that box, and you said, I'm going to value my principles. I'm going to value my beliefs. So that is you writing your own story in a circumstance that wasn't working in your favor. And That's one of the reasons why you and I bonded right off the bat, is because we were both outcasts in our respective experience, because we didn't go along with the box that was created for us. We wanted to be more than that, because we are more than that. There's certain characteristics that maybe work, but it's, how do I express this? This is where words become difficult, because it's an abstract concept, but it's there's so much to people. If you think about one person as an individual, sure, there's going to be stereotypes that they fit into, but there's also going to be so much more. No one is one thing all the time. So some of the time you're going to fit into this idea that people have created for you. But most of the time, you're also going to contradict that, because there's contradictory elements in everyone's personality. Like you can, like, for example, I'm an introvert, but when I am being social, you would never tell, because I can be very social and I love being around people. But I still identify as an introvert because I like to be on my own and I like to have that time to myself. So like no one's going to be one thing all of the time. And I think because you had that courage to say, I'm not going to start treating women a certain way because everyone around me is you rebelling against the narrative that was written for you.
Right. But where I differ from a lot of people is when I say that story, or when I express these kind of things in my journey and my the pressures I felt, it doesn't separate me from other people the way it used to. It only makes me relate to them more. So when I see a lot of the men now that I used to know back then, people that were confident and happy, or so I thought, who made a lot of the mistakes that I was fortunate enough to be able to avoid, I think it helps me relate to them more. So there's less of a separation when it's everybody's different and everybody's got their own things, and it's all fragmented of one main kind of core understanding. And it's that search for the why that leads people to make those poor choices. And instead of reflecting on those poor choices, they ignore them and they will pretend they don't exist, and they will actually start rationalizing those choices, and it becomes part of their point of view in their own self-interest. And so I never felt like I could relate to the people around me growing up, and to the people that I thought lacked values and principles, the people that I felt lacked empathy for. They cared more about mankind than they did for humanity. Those people like that, I've come to relate more and more to, as understanding the pressure that I faced to be when I was at my most insecure. I realized those people in the same way face those same pressures and with just different insecurities. And now they are doing the same thing to the next generation. That's where I didn't realize what the world was like until I kind of went through that, the aging, those kind of evolutionary process of being a human being. So I used to feel like I couldn't relate to another person on this fucking planet all growing up. Now I feel like I can relate to everybody on the planet just from understanding that we're all facing pressures. So where some people are introvert, some people are extrovert. That's because they faced different pressures growing up and had different instances and traumas, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just where they were pushed to feel most comfortable. And I find the more we start to separate ourselves from that and go the other way, as opposed to finding the identity that makes us comfortable, it's about rejecting identity entirely. I think that is a way to reevaluate identity itself. And by adding more value and creating more boxes and giving people more boxes to lock themselves in and define themselves, I think is a step back, not a step forward. It's people who want to live in a certain identity. People don't like it because they don't fit in that identity. So they give other people different identities to apply to, as opposed to questioning their own to begin with.
I both agree and disagree. I agree with the bigger picture. Absolutely. I think if we all just separated from putting ourselves in boxes, that would be a beautiful world to live in. But I think because of the current world we live in, those identifiers do actually help. And I think they help because they become signifiers of how we can learn to understand each other. Where it becomes problematic, I think, is when it becomes just that. So it's like, you can be an introvert, but like there's always going to be an asterisk, because introvert means something different to you than it means to me. Overall, like there is a definition to this word where we can understand, like, okay, this person likes to spend time on their own. This person needs their own space to recharge. But like someone's going to look at that and think like, oh, okay, this person doesn't want to socialize. Whereas you're going to look at it as like, this isn't your only thing. I don't know if I'm explaining it very well, but like the idea is, I think those identifiers, labels, whatever you want to call them, help, because language is a very useful tool of communication in us getting to know each other, us understanding each other, because everyone has different experiences. But I think like overall it does, like you're right, it can be problematic because it can be restricting.
So you start off by saying, well, in this time, in the way the world is right now, they're a good thing, right? Or like that's something like that.
To a
Not word for word,
degree,
to a degree,
to a
right?
degree, because the world is in a really messy transitional
But
phase right now,
but
and
that's my point. My point is the world has always
the
been in a
communication
transitional phase.
helps.
But my point is the world has always been in a transitional phase, and when we consider our time and place and how the world is right now, that is an example. Like to me, that signifies we have to stop valuing that stuff. To me, that applies self-interest. So it's better for the world, and it has for right now, and it makes our lives a little bit easier. But I think it hurts people long term. And I think if we put in the work now to reevaluate those kind of subjective identities that we've created, because it's just our society. 1,000 years ago, they didn't have all these things. 1,000 years later, they won't. So we only created them for our own comfort and our own sense of belonging. And if we reevaluate them, I think the world could be a much different place in 30 years, because we've never stopped transitioning, and we never will. We've been transitioning the same way for how many decades and generations now. And instead of trying to sort out all the boxes, we need to reevaluate all of them. And that is where taking our self-interest out of it. And so we are going down this path of becoming more and more comfortable in our own little boxes, and finding which box is most comfortable when they'll all suffocate. None of them are comfortable. They're just more comfortable, and they are in our own little self-interest. And that's just where I differ. That's just where I differ from other people. And I'm not saying my point of view is right. I'm just saying my perspective is one of reevaluating what the right answer is.
And yeah, and I agree with you in that regard, but also like if you're existing in a circumstance that is so far beyond what society is expecting of you, where you feel completely alien and invisible, that box might offer more comfort than just,
right. But that's
floating
self-interest.
Yeah, but that self-interest
that
is a stepping stone to the bigger picture. Like I think those stepping stones are necessary.
I think self-interest is the stepping stone to the wrong picture, though. And I think by us encouraging self-interest and being placed in little boxes, we encourage other generations in the future to do the same. And there has to be a generation that decides we're going to stop and reevaluate everything that's been done before, as opposed to continuing what's been done before. And if we keep continuing the way that we've been heading for our own self-interest, because that's exactly what the generations before us do, that we think, fuck, they fucked up the world, right? The environment, all of this, the race, all throughout our history, it's simply a reflection of self-interest. And I think by continuing what we feel is respect and acceptance is simply continuing and evolving our own self-interest as opposed to evolving our objective perspective and our imagination. There's very little imagination to making boxes more comfortable, but it takes a lot of imagination and consideration and empathy and everything and vulnerabilities to explore a different trajectory. And that's just
okay.
And again, everybody might hate me listening to this. They could all hate me, and disagree. Every single person on this planet could disagree with what I'm saying right now, but that doesn't mean it's wrong, but it doesn't mean I'm right either. So all it is just, here's a different thing that no one else has ever done, and no other generation or country or group has ever done. I hear a lot of people saying, let's continue to do what other people have done. I rarely have I heard an original thought from someone of a direction or trajectory, other than let's just continue to be go this path and be more comfortable subjectively as opposed to finding a greater objective. So to me, that is an objective that matters more to than the self-interest of my own subjective point of view, if that makes sense. I'm a
Yeah,
contradict. So
I get that. How do you exist objectively when you're not comfortable with yourself subjectively? Because you do still have to exist in the world. So if you're someone who's lost because you don't have a sense of identity, or the identity that you have doesn't match what is expected of you, like how do you simply bypass that self-discovery, that self-realization, actualization, before you can exist in the world and that objective point of view? Because like
that's a great question.
it's easy to say, like when you're in a position of privilege, but like if you're not, then like you still have to live in the world. We still have to live in a society. You can't just completely bypass that experience of figuring out who you are. That subjective
Right,
experience matters.
but why is who you are, why is that defined by who you are subjectively? Why do we have to succeed in these ways that people have already predetermined to give ourselves that self-esteem? And that's what I'm saying is, you don't need to succeed subjectively to create an objective that is separated from your self-interest. And so I think it doesn't matter if you think that being rich and being popular and other people respecting you is the first step to exploring your perspective, then that is dependent on the people around you respecting you. And I'm saying you don't have to earn that respect and that value to reevaluate. You don't need to have a Ferrari to reevaluate the value of a Ferrari. And I think that's where we're wrong with the world, is saying, unless you're comfortable with yourself, you can't explore any other options. And so people say, Matt, I'm not going to listen to your opinion until you have these diplomas, until you have 12 years with a psychology degree. You are not allowed to talk about the mindset or perspective or anything like that, because I want to make sure that you went and memorized all this other stuff. I'm saying that's the problem, is we always think we have to follow certain checklists to reach a certain point that then we are afforded the opportunity to reevaluate. I'm saying kids need to start reevaluating a lot earlier. And I wish parents encourage their children to reevaluate everything they're told and everything that they learn and everything that they experience. And that is learning earlier, so they don't have to go through this kind of awful peer pressure and not understand why. And so I feel like when kids, when we're talking about like, okay, what is etiquette? What is politeness and kindness? I feel like that is all empathy and perspective. It's not about memorizing what to say and how to act. It's about understanding why and understanding pressure and comfortability. I don't care if someone says thank you, if they acknowledge and that I went out of my way, where someone else can say thank you, but they don't give a shit and they didn't notice. They just memorize that they should say thank you. And so I think people waste their lives in subjective pursuits, because truly they just turn their objective in their life. That is their objective. Their life objective is to become as subjectively secure as they can. And I'm saying there is no security in subjective pursuits. It is simply less valuable and less secure than an objective that is greater than yourself. That's how you wake up excited to get out of bed every day, because there is momentum that matters more than what people think of you. And if the core of your mindset is, I care most about what people think of me and how I feel about myself, then the world doesn't matter as much. And by looking at the world first, it doesn't matter how good looking I am. If I get a zit, I don't care. I broke my nose a couple of weeks ago. I didn't care, because that was a subjective thing that no one else's life was different if my nose is broken and looks a little weird. And for me to be disappointed or sad and depressed because my nose was broken, it didn't make sense to me. There was no value in it when I'm looking around and thinking, there's so many bigger things out there that I wish I could communicate, or that I want to reevaluate myself. And my broken nose was waiting for me to reevaluate what is attractiveness. And then I look around, I see people depressed because they've got a zit, or because their eyebrows are a little different, or because they want to get surgery. And it's like, who benefits from someone being more attractive? Fucking nobody. It's useless except for that subjective insecurity. And I think people like, oh, if I just had a nice girlfriend, or if I just had like this and this, people would think differently of me. But none of that would matter to their value. It would just distract them from that kind of insecurity. That wouldn't matter what kind of partner they had. It wouldn't matter what kind of career they had. Because all those people that have everything that other people wish for are also insecure. And so that's the idea, is we've been taught this is how you find happiness, and it's a subjective pursuit. And I say there's no happiness in there. There is simply disillusionment, and we can prevent people from arriving at disillusionment by telling them their objective is not their own subjective benefit. An objective that makes you happy and fulfilled and positive is a mindset that is greater than just what people think of you, because there's no value. There's no value to that. I don't care what anyone thought of anyone 1,000 years ago, or 100 years ago, or 50 years ago. I don't care about anyone's reputation, because I find the people that are most memorialized and have monuments to are some of the worst people. And that's just because the people around them value that. And I value the people that are on Mount Rushmore and all the people in history that I was told, I value those people a lot less than the people that they hurt to get to this place. Sorry, rambling. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not talking about material success or reputation and what other people think about you. I'm talking about your subjective perspective of yourself, like how you view yourself and how you identify. Because I mean, it's like it's not necessarily just about like having the right partner or having the right job. It's about feeling comfortable in your own skin, feeling comfortable in your own body existing in this world. So when I talk about those boxes and identity, to me, it's about finding something tangible that speaks to you, where you can say, yes, this is me, this is the authentic me, you understand. And those boxes and those labels create almost like a language where we can communicate with each other. Because I mean, like, for example, like my experience as a queer person is going to be very different than someone who's not queer, like in terms of what our life goals are, how we move through space, like it's going to be different. So I think that those identifiers add value, because it's not just about how other people view you, it's about how you view yourself. Because if you don't understand yourself, you're going to be lost existing in the world.
Love that. I love that. But how do you know how to view yourself if you have no concept of scale? So I'm saying, so my thing is, we have a rough idea, or we're told a rough idea of who we are and our place in this world. And human beings are up here and everything else is below, and being comfortable in our own skin. But what if that is reevaluating what comfortable in our own skin means? So I'm saying I agree with all of, like, I agree with that point of view, except I'm asking to, what if we reevaluate before that? So I was never comfortable in my own skin, nor do I ever really want to be, because that is something that people will never understand. I don't want people to ever look at my skin. Don't look at my skin, because my skin doesn't matter. Don't look at my sexuality, because my sexuality doesn't matter. None of the more I push back and I separate myself from all of the boxes, the healthier I feel. And the more and the less I relate to people who find smaller and smaller and smaller boxes. It's like Plinko, right? You start at the top and you go through your life and you're just finding those little tiny spots, and you fall into that one spot in that one box. This is who I am. But I'm saying that is suffocating. And it's just what we're used to and what we're told to do, because there's a value to that. And I say that the value is a negative value. It allows people to generalize. The more I fit into boxes, the more it creates a shallow point of view. The less I lean into the boxes, the more it gives me a bright perspective, because I am not that box that becomes my identity, as much as I am the opposite of that.
I'm not talking about fitting into a tiny box. I'm talking about adding boxes, adding hexagons to build a hive, which becomes your identity. So it's not just about making yourself small enough to fit into one specific box. It's about recognizing that you are multiple boxes. You are many things. You are an entire system. You are like an entire ecosystem in yourself as an individual, and you are part of a bigger ecosystem in a community. It's not about narrowing it down. It's about saying, I'm this, I'm also this, and this, and this. I'm all of these boxes. I'm not just one, I am an entire system.
Right. And
a matrix, if you will.
Right. And then there's escaping the matrix. So all of the boxes, whether there's 1 or 1,000, whatever size they are, for me, that change in me happened when I started to think outside the box, or outside all of the boxes. And so, yes, I'm part of in those boxes because of all the ways that people can define me and recognize me, but I am none of them, as well as
you're also
I
beyond
fit a bunch
that.
of them.
Yes.
Right. And so there's a difference, right? People focus on which boxes they're part of, as opposed to taking themselves outside of that equation. And you are either part of you are either a measurement in physics itself, or you become an observer of the physics. And so that's where the take
both.
But
I think
no,
it's
exactly.
both simultaneously, because like you're part of the equation, but you're also the observer of the equation.
Right. But all my life, people told me I was in the box. And that's my point, and everyone else can have the same point of view as Matt. You can be inside of this box or inside of a bunch of other boxes, and it doesn't matter if there's 1,000 of them or whatever the case may be. And every single person can have the exact same mindset of being inside that box. But I do not relate to that anymore. And that's why everybody's different. But me personally, I relate to only being outside of the box and looking at, it's almost like seeing the forest for the trees. And so I don't see the trees, even though I'm one of the trees. I relate to the forest as being a part of the forest. And so people can talk about my branches, people can talk about my trunks, etc., bark, but I'm a part of this grander forest. And the value of the forest is always going to be more than the values of the trees. And the more we focus on our own tree, the less we focus on the forest itself. And that's what I believe is the core of mindset. The core is it either begins subjectively or it begins objectively. And when I say it's taking self-interest out, is removing subjective from the core and only having objective. And it's having a positive objective without your self-interest in it. And if someone's mindset is built on that, self-interest will grow and expand organically and evolve. But if we decide the boxes are what matter first, we evolve into a box as opposed to evolving outside of it. You learn to fit your aquarium as opposed to growing to swim in the ocean. I don't know. I think we're talking about the exact same thing, just from different points of view. And that's what I love. That's why I love perspective.
I agree. And I think you have a beautiful point of view. And like, it's seeing the forest is also the way that like I've grown up thinking, is because I've always looked at the world as a whole. And like part of that has been like, changing continents from a very young age and seeing two very, very different parts of the world and experiencing two very different cultures, and realizing like at the end of the day, we're all just human. And like at the end of the day, we all have like the same goal. But what I'm talking about is not disregarding the importance of the individual, because every single one of those trees is unique, and every single one of those trees has, certain pigmentation, certain experience, like their branches are shaped in a way because of their environment, and it's all of those individual trees that create that forest. So I think, yes, absolutely, focus on the bigger picture. Don't generalize people because of superficial traits, but also there are attributes about individuals that creates the beauty in the forest. It's
Right,
just,
but what comes first?
it's both thing. I think it's both. I don't think it's
But
one or the other. I think they work simultaneously. Like they're both important at the same time,
so,
because
there's
they both
looking at it
exist.
outside in, and there's looking at it inside out, and I think
And
it's
I look at both
reevaluating those
perspectives
both.
simultaneously.
Right, and where what one other thing where you say like I love it. Yeah, we're all human, all of the continents, the different cultures, all of that. But I disagree where it comes to we all have the same goal, because that's the difference between objective and subjective. A goal is an objective thing. Now, the colors of your own plant is a subjective thing. And so we don't all have the
Sorry,
same
would you
goals.
agree that all humans want to belong to something bigger than themselves? I would argue that that's everyone's ultimate goal,
But
is like everything that you're trying to
it's
do, even if it's
how
just
and
gaining
why.
success, because nobody wants to get rich and famous to like be by themselves. They want to be rich and famous because they want to be a part of something.
You tell me
Like
one person
everybody
who's
is
rich
just,
and famous who's not isolated.
that's just it though, because like you're not aiming for isolation, you're aiming for belonging. Isolation is the aftermath
Right.
of making a certain set of choices, but the
Right. But
ultimate goal is belonging, and I would argue that
what
that's
would you
every,
do to
like
belong?
humans.
Right, self-interest. I think that's self-interest. That is not my goal, is not belonging, because I don't want to find a place I belong. I want to inspire a brighter place than what there ever has been in this world. And I think if everybody had that as the objective, instead of fitting into the boxes that they've already built, building a brand new box is my objective. And it's not me
We're
building the
talking about the
box,
exact
it's
same
everybody.
thing.
I think there's just there's just different layers to it, and understanding that um, having this goal, that because I think a lot of people want to, when it comes to belonging, a lot of people create belonging by pushing other people out of it, and so they feel like they belong more if other people belong less. And so that's where the bullying and the exclusion and that kind of stuff, which is ingrained in us, that's the whole borders thing, because Americans don't feel proud unless they talk about how they're the best country. They're the shining city on the hill. They're where everybody, like, listening to Americans talk about America is the most hilarious thing I could express from a narcissistic, shallow point of view. And it's that kind of thing, like, they are not proud to be Americans unless they keep other people out of America. If they want to be, if they're so proud about America, you think they'd want more people. If they were a great, proud country, you think they'd be able to take even more influx of people because they want the world to be happier. But they don't. They want to feel like they belong somewhere where other people don't belong. And so that's where a lot of people have a hard time with when it comes to boxes, because people will create these beautiful boxes and tell other people they don't belong there. And
But that's
I
not the
think
goal. The goal is
exactly
not to exclude or to isolate. The goal is to create a community. So I
right,
think like the purpose
but a
of the
community with
boxes
everybody.
is if
Sorry.
right. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Go ahead.
My apologies. I didn't mean to get in there. Yeah, no, I just think that I think there's a way that we've been sold, this is what progress is. And I just think that it is subjective progress, which is the wrong direction. It's making people feel less insecure as opposed to making people feel more insecure. More secure. So those are two completely different things. We provide a society that allows people to feel less insecure about themselves as opposed to feeling more secure about who they could be and who they really are.
Mhm.
We sell
Yeah.
insecurity. We don't sell security. Watch the
Yeah.
news. The news sells you insecurity and ways that you can feel more comfortable with yourself and your own self-interest, as opposed to ways that reevaluate what we think is right.
Mhm. I remember what I was going to say. It's I think it's like the ultimate goal of having those identifiers is because you're creating a space where it's like, oh, you're like me. So it's people being able to come together and saying, I was an outcast because of this. You were also an outcast because of this, but now we're no longer outcasts because we have each other. So it's creating those communal spaces. Where it becomes problematic is when you exclude other people, because the exclusion in the first place is the issue that creates the isolation. Because if we were all just accepting of everyone, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The world would be a very different place, but
Right.
that's not the world we live in. We live in
Right.
a world that likes to separate and have our own
Boxes?
systems, our own communities, our borders, like imaginary lines on nature, which is a bizarre concept, but it's the fact, like it's those communities that at the same time create a sense of belonging in a world that is very separated. It's super weird. It's super strange because it's like ultimately like all we want is for everyone to just feel safe in a space together, but
the only reason I
to
never felt like I belonged
backwards because they create spaces for some people and exclude others. And then those people who were excluded from spaces create a new space for everyone else who was excluded, but you're still having like those separate pockets when ultimately I believe that everyone's goal is to just belong. And like when I say belong, I don't mean belong to like an elitist club. I mean belong to humanity, to the earth. Like this planet is an organism and we are all a part of it. Like we are all part of this one thing.
That's how I see the forest. That is an objective, is to belong. And the only reason I felt like I didn't belong for 33 years is because other people wanted to feel like they belong. And that value to them made them exclude me from it. So I think looking at belonging to boxes or to smaller groups and communities is a luxury. I think that's an entitlement. It's from people that found a box that made them feel better than they used to feel. And not everyone has that ability or is born in a time, in a place that has a box for them. And so that's where taking our self-interest out of it is seeing the world. And everybody can belong today. Everybody can belong today. If we decided that everybody belonging to the world mattered more than people belonging to their boxes. People will kill the world to stand up and defend their boxes. People will shoot someone else and kill them because their box matters more than that human being's belonging on this planet. They say, so that guy was about to steal my radio, so I shot him because my radio matters more to me than that person's belonging. My belongings matter more than that person's belonging. And I disagree, because that is a subjective mindset. His objective wasn't to be like, oh, buddy, if you like you want to steal this radio, or is like, you must be under a lot of pressure right now. I think if nobody was poor, nobody would steal shit. If everybody was compassionate, there would be no courage left, because there would be no place for it. The only reason there's bravery and courage and strength is because the world lacks it. So we look at all these people, like the first Black woman Supreme Court justice, right? Celebrated. I don't celebrate her as I look at the world and think, what fucking took so long? And so by celebrating her, we are doing actual disservice to the attention that deserves to be looking at common sense. Why are we celebrating her when we're not looking at that common sense is clearly wrong? But it gives us a place of comfort and gives us self-interest. But when we realize our humanity has been lacking, and a great measurement is that we've never had, like America has never had a Black female Supreme Court justice. Don't celebrate her, reevaluate humanity and how wrong things have been. And that's where I differ. Everybody wants to celebrate change when I think we need to reevaluate everything more, as opposed to, you know, yeah, it's easier to keep the status quo and try to paint over it than it is to erase it all and create a greater sense of belonging than we've ever had before. And that takes imagination and courage. And that's just because there is none in this world. And maybe that's a nihilistic way to put it, but I think it's a bright, objective way to look at the world.
So I think that common sense is a perspective, and I think that it's because it's a specific point of view, like, right? It's like you're looking at it from one angle. And having those moments of celebration, I think, open people's eyes to seeing things from a different perspective. Because, like, if you're a cis white straight man, you're not gonna look at a woman of color coming into a position of power as anything like, oh yeah, whatever, like, you know, people come into positions of power all the time. But if you're a woman of color seeing this happen, it's going to mean something different to you because it's the first time you've seen it. So I think those moments are worth celebrating because change doesn't happen overnight. You're not just going to like change everyone's mind in one shot and say, okay, everyone wake up now. Let's look at like the bigger picture. It's not going to happen because people have their point of view and they're unaware. It's hidden in their peripherals. You have to open their eyes to those hidden things. And to do that, you have to celebrate these moments. You have to show people that change is happening. It's happening for a reason and it is progressing. And the more it happens, it snowballs. It's just like, it's not going to happen overnight. And like disregarding those moments, I think is actually going backwards because you're not recognizing the change that's already happening. It's just not happening at the speed in which would be the most beneficial.
I agree. I do want to go backwards because I think we've been heading the wrong direction for decades and centuries. And so I disagree that continuing this direction is healthy. I think to acknowledge that maybe we took the wrong course in our evolution is reevaluating, because we look at revolutions and we look at these incremental changes like they're change. My world is not any better today than it was 2 weeks ago before she was sworn in. And it's not any better than it was really 10 years ago. The world itself, my mindset and how I value the world and the things in it is different. So it's not about the world changing. It's about people's value changing and how people see the world and see each other. We shouldn't celebrate these things as being a first. We should use these kind of things. Okay, this is the first time that this has happened. Why? Why is it taking so long? Mm-hmm. Why didn't this happen 100 years ago?
But how do you recognize that if it doesn't happen? Like, how would you even know to think about that if it wasn't made to be a thing? So that celebration is what adds attention to it so that you can start thinking, well, wait a minute, why is this the first time? Why hasn't this happened before? You can't go back.
Acknowledgement and celebration is different.
And
disagree. And I think acknowledgement and celebration are two vastly different things. And I think celebrating things is different than reevaluating and being honest. People aren't honest. Like, people are celebrating Pride Month as opposed to acknowledging the devastation of the countless human beings that were murdered and abused and destroyed and went through hell that people couldn't understand.
Have to be an acknowledgement of suffering. Like, why not have those moments of celebration amongst the chaos? Because I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's fair to spend your entire life suffering in a circumstance only to have some good thing happen. And then you don't even get to celebrate that because you immediately have to go, okay, well, like, how are we going to change the world with this thing? Like, I think those moments of celebration are important. I think Pride Month is important.
But that is a luxury and an entitlement that people don't get to do. And for thousands of years, people who just wanted to explore the luxuries we have today were absolutely horrifically mutilated. And I think the more we focus on celebration, the less we focus on honesty. And I see Canada Day celebration. I don't celebrate Canada Day anymore because I know what Canada was built on. And so I think celebrating Canada Day takes away from the evaluating of how we got to here. And I think
But
it
I'm
is
talking about the celebration of marginalized communities, not
right. But I'm
somebody
talking
who's
about
like celebrating Canada is very different than celebrating Pride. Those
right.
are
And
two very different things.
I think all of it is grounded in self-interest. And if it's based on someone's own self-interest, they will want to see it a certain way. And I think it is almost impossible for most people to take that self-interest out. And to me, that's what perspective is. The further we can go from our own self-interest, and the more we can see the world as relatable. And so to continue this way is to live as individual trees, as opposed to reassessing and realizing that the more we look up to trees, the less we will look up to nature itself. And by realizing how we apply our pressures to in the world around us, it's not about getting less insecure. Again, it's about understanding why. And there is no exploration of why in celebration. There's no exploration of why in a lot of the education system. It's just, this is what it is, memorize the right answers. And so I hear a lot of people just repeating what the right answer is. And that's what I believe is common sense, this memorization without a foundation of understanding why. And so when people tell me this is what I believe, I ask why they believe that. And rarely do they have an answer. They say, well, just because. And right away I go, okay, it's their self-interest. And so right away I go, okay, then their opinion honestly is only valuable as a measurement device of self-interest. And until we learn to take our self-interest out, we will continue going down the direction of evolving self-interest over greater interest. And people will suffer in 20 years and in 50 years. People will suffer because of our choices to just be more comfortable with ourselves as opposed to making the world a better place. Because I know if people acted differently 100 years ago, this world would be a much better place than it is today. If people stood up, if people stood up 100 years ago, because the people that did stand up 100 years ago, for people like me, the only reason I can celebrate and speak my mind and be who I am today is because people 100 years ago put their self-interest aside and were called nigger lovers by saying these people are human beings. And it was a slow day by day, because those people whose self-interest it was in calling people nigger lovers were people that had to literally die so that we could evolve, because their self-interest was so rooted in their belonging of this idea of beauty or of heightened genetics or whatever the case may be. One of the people I look up to the most in the world is Alan Turing, who basically invented the first computer. And he did that, and he helped with World War II and code cracking, saved so many lives. What did they do with him after? They found out he was gay, so they chemically castrated him. I have yet to hear a Pride month where they truly talk about how this world was shaped by a person like that and what they did to him after. I don't care how happy these people are when they don't respect what happened before or don't understand why. Why do we celebrate Pride? Because I relate to the rainbow flag. I relate to this grander happiness that people call gay, that I realize when people talk about gay 500 years ago and talked about what people were going through, it had nothing to do with sexuality. It had everything to do with security and comfort and a broader perspective. And so they didn't see male and female. They didn't see those kind of subjective differences. And so I think that we've gone and colored in the boxes with the rainbow flags as opposed to the original meaning of pride, which has nothing to do with your subjective point of view and everything to do with your brighter, beautiful layers of all your colors, right? Each box has its own color when really you are all those beautiful layers of color. So I see people in the parades and everybody going, yeah, like let's, they're walking around with dildos and all these sex toys. And I go, it has nothing to do with sex and everything to do with how you feel about yourself and what limitations you put on yourself. And I don't want anyone to be put limitations on themselves or other people It's just having a different point of view or a greater perspective than that subjective point of view that people have. And I say that knowing that it's going to piss probably you off and everybody else off, because I'm saying it with my self-interest removed. And so people that are afraid of getting canceled, people that are afraid of what other people might think, and all these other things, it's often because they speak with self-interest first. And so I could be wrong, and I'm probably wrong, and I'm going to come back in a week and say everything I said was ignorant and I had no idea what I was saying and I was completely wrong. But it comes from a place
At
of
least you
lacking
have the
self-interest.
self-awareness.
Exactly. So it's all about conversation.
So,
And by saying the same
yeah.
stuff as everyone else, we are simply continuing the same conversation as opposed to starting a new one.
Right. So where you're wrong, where I think you're wrong, is where you're failing to recognize that a lot of these individuals who are celebrating out of self-interest are more marginalized than other people. Right. So in a perfect world, sure, we can throw all of that out the window and say, look at the bigger picture, like take self-interest out of it. Unfortunately, we live in a society that likes to categorize people and treat people differently based on those categories. And
Right.
So if you're already getting beaten down and like you have this like small window of like, I can just go out and self-express whatever that is, why wouldn't you have that like moment of comfort in a world that's constantly garbage? Because like you can't just live in darkness all the time. You have to have those moments of light. And until everybody gets on the same frequency, it's not going to happen. So while you're living in a situation where like you might be thinking like you might already be like way ahead of the game, which you are, because you're already thinking like beyond skin pigmentation, beyond gender, beyond sexuality, you're already like way ahead of the game, but like we don't live in that world yet. So while we're living in this world, we need to recognize that like you have to have those safe spaces for people who have a shittier hand to feel like they're part of something. Because if you're isolated in a world that's already isolated, it's too many layers of negativity.
Well, we don't live in a perfect world, and we don't live in the world I described yet, because people refuse to look at the world this way. And I just think we are grounded in the lowest common denominator. And that's saying like, well, this is the way the world is, so we have to act in that kind of fashion and think the same way everyone else does. I say that's exactly why the world is wrong and why the world will continue to be wrong.
But how do you show them if you don't draw attention to these things?
By looking at,
if you just ignore them,
by looking at human history, right? By looking at human history. So we take today, we look at everything that's happened before and what we know of it. And we say, what if all of this was wrong? And what if the mindset of creating more and more boxes doesn't help? What if putting our own self-interest first, whether the world is the same way, it's finding the right way to do it and the right way to have the conversation. And I think clearly overt in your face strap-ons and all these things that people are getting carried away with when it comes to celebrating. Like coming out of the closet is not going into a different closet. Coming out of the closet is escaping the first layer of that kind of prison that you lived in. But then what about getting out of the room, and then getting out of the house, and then getting out of the town, and then coming out of the closet is step one of breaking through what people told you or told people were those boundaries, those boxes. So why can't we celebrate going further?
Some people have more closets than you. Some people have way more closets to get through than you've had to get through. And you can't just say like, oh, well, that's only the first one, like get on my level, because it takes time. And like, you can't just bypass everything. Like you can't just bypass all the rooms to get to the same room, because we all start in different spaces.
But you realize
if somebody, no, let me finish.
Sorry,
if somebody wants to self-express by putting a strap on and walking down the street. What's wrong with that? Like, why is there an issue with that? Like, who cares if it's self-interest? If that's what that person needs to get through that room to get to the next level, then so be it. And that
I
should
agree.
be celebrated.
100%, right? 100%. Walk with that dildo. What comes next? What's next other than sexual identity? But that's
Dude,
identity.
Evolution takes time. Evolution moves so slowly.
Right, which is
And
exactly
we need
what
those steps.
But that's exactly what the worst people that have ever existed used as an excuse to slow progress and in their own self-interest. Okay, now I'm comfortable. This is my comfort zone. Let's stay here for a while, right?
No,
we talk about
this is my comfort zone for now. Like,
yeah.
it's like a
But what if your
staircase.
comfort zone is uncomfortable for other people, but it's most comfortable for you? So what if there are some more steps to go to make other people feel comfortable? So how many people came out?
Progress.
Right. So how many people came out when they were younger and it was so difficult, but they're so proud of themselves after, and they felt on top of the world. And 10 years later, they feel like they used to feel. How many people are going through that, but they've already climbed into that box and became, this is my identity. I've already went through all of this. I came out to my family. Everybody went through so much struggle to accept me for who I am. And now I feel like I've changed. And there's nobody else I've seen that said, I went through all of this and I went this far and realized it wasn't about sexual identity. It was about identity itself. So they went, I don't like the identity I was given. So I found a different identity. And realizing that no matter which identity people jump to as like one of those lily pads, those lily pads are not sustainable. They're not a strong foundation. And so I'm looking for right. They are information, but where do we go from there? So we've seen this.
We're talking about moving forward. It's just like, you can't bypass those lily pads in the world that we live in. Like, in a perfect world, sure, we wouldn't even be talking about our sexuality as part of our identity. It would just be like a thing that we don't discuss. Like, we wouldn't need to have pronouns.
That's my objective.
Our social media bio. But the thing is, we don't live in that world. The world that we do live in is a work in progress. And while we're the work in progress, those things help. Because
they help some people. And they don't help other people.
Those people matter. Those people matter, though.
Right.
Everybody matters.
But so do the people who disagree. And so it's deciding who matters more. And I say nobody matters more. And that's my point, is boxes matter to different people. Different boxes matter more to different people. And what I'm saying is, when we take our right, but they matter for self-interest. They don't matter for, so my objective is that perfect world you describe. That is my objective. I wake up every morning wanting to reevaluate myself and the world to get to a place like that. And I'm saying, by living in the moment, we are failing to create the world we wish we could live in. By saying that first, we need to take care of how we feel about ourselves before we take care of the objective of, like you say, that end game. And I'm saying, what if we put the end game and that pursuit ahead of how we feel today and how we will feel best about ourselves today? Because everybody cares most about feeling like they belong. And we focus on feeling belonging in a world we don't belong in, as opposed to creating a world that everyone can belong in. And I would rather
what we're doing.
Well, hopefully,
I think we're
right.
Because the thing is, like, there's a default setting. Like, you're born, and what's the first thing that happens? They put an M or an F on your birth certificate, right?
Right.
Like, who decided that? Who decided? Right. Who decided that gender should be a thing? Who decided that, people were born with certain parts should be raised this way and other people should be raised this way? Who decided that? So the reason we have those pronouns is because we are changing that system, but it takes time. So you might not agree with the pronouns because it doesn't matter to you, but for some people who were raised a certain way that doesn't fit with who they are inside, it's gonna matter. It's gonna have an impact. And I think that's important, because that's progress. That's how we draw attention to this thing needs to be changed. And if this is the way we change it, then that's the way we change it.
but that's the way that some people want to change it. More pronouns doesn't change it. That's the Plinko example that I use, where it starts off with that box, M and F, right? You drop it. And then as you grow older, more and more boxes come and your trajectory can change. So my point is it's, I believe, and again, I could be wrong and I probably am, who knows, right? All I know is I feel objective. And taking, again, when you say, well, that's how you feel, and other people feel this way, and other people feel this way, and I'm saying that's exactly my point. Is I'm saying it without my self-interest, and I know other people feel differently, and I'm saying those people need to take that self-interest out of the equation as well. And I think by removing the pronouns is how we create more belonging, a greater sense of belonging, and more relatability. It's not about creating more pronouns and more boxes and more little ways to define yourself as opposed to human being. If we all shot everything in the garbage and said, we're all human beings, that's our identity. We're a human being. Nothing else matters as far as anything else. Is just a human being who belongs in this world without pressure to be anything other than who they feel. And if everybody looked at it as pressure, then people without the pressure of self-interest, we will see that there is room to belong. And this world that we talk about that is a fantasy, this can happen faster than we could have imagined, except we choose not to. We choose to take the slow route that is based on our own sense of comfort and who we want to be, as opposed to the world, the way that we want the world to be. And I would rather the generations of kids coming down the line to live in a better world than to me to feel better about myself today and my own self-interest.
But how do you change the default overnight? Like, how do you change the default setting without drawing attention to the fact that there is a default setting? Because it's
by
so
communicating
ingrained.
perspective. That's the whole concept.
How do we do that? How do we do that? How do we
Conversation.
communicate our experience without talking about those boxes, without talking about identity, without talking about experience?
But I want to talk about them. I don't want to overvalue them as an answer. And so the way that we relate. I'm not
talking about overvaluing them. I'm talking about them as stepping stones. I'm talking about pronouns as a stepping stone.
Right. And I'm talking about pronouns as the wrong direction. So if you're using, so I feel like if we use pronouns as a stepping stone, we're stepping the wrong way. And that's where I disagree with most other people comfortably. I'm glad I have an original thought that is completely undetached or completely detached from what is best for me. And so it's impossible for me to agree that we will achieve the objective we want to achieve by all of us caring first and foremost about how insecure we don't want to feel. I think what we've done to make ourselves feel more comfortable in this world has made this world a far less relatable place. I think people can relate to each other less and less the more we use the boxes, but understand that if we look at the boxes differently, that's how we can relate to people. Hey, look, we're in different boxes, but they mean the same thing, that we're fucking sad and insecure, right? Nobody has the answer. Every box that's come before us is a box that didn't have the answer. It just made people feel a little less bad. And so by looking at all the boxes evenly and saying none of them are the right answer, we get a better sense of the big picture. We're not looking for the pixel that's the brightest. We're looking at the big picture and saying all those pixels all equate to the same picture. And that's a different way of looking at it than who's right and who's wrong. It's everybody's wrong. Everyone who looks at the world through their own self-interest and point of view, I believe, is wrong. And that's just a way to, I think, to restart the conversation. Which country was right? Which culture was right? Which religion was right? What if they're all wrong? What if every identity is the wrong identity? There's just some that feel better than others, but what if they're all wrong?
Mm-hmm. See, I've had a different experience because in learning more terminology and having more of those conversations about boxes, I've actually gained more of a sense of belonging, and I've gained more of a sense of self and overcome insecurities. because of that validation of, oh, it's not just me having this outcast experience. There are other people who have this experience. We just don't have a label for it because we are in the minority. And the default setting is this. We don't fit into the default setting, therefore we don't belong. Oh, but there's this other option that I had no name for. You've presented me with a name.
Right.
Now I have a way of talking about it. And I think that's the biggest thing, is the communication, the language, because that's how we talk to each other.
Right.
So we can take all of these abstract concepts of gender and identity, but when we actually discuss it and put language to it and share our experience, that's how we learn about it. If we're not talking about it, people who have never experienced that isolation of being an outcast because you don't fit the default, they're never going to think about it because they've never had to think about it. They've never experienced it.
Right.
So if someone says, hey, I want to talk about pronouns, I want you to address me this way, it makes you think, okay, well, why is that? Well, why do we have pronouns in the first place? And it makes you look at the bigger picture in a way that you've never thought of before. I get what you're saying because you want to move past it, but
because those are two examples.
First.
Right. And I agree. But those are two examples of self-interest. It's one person's self-interest and then another person saying, this is my self-interest. And so I want you to listen to my self-interest rather than saying, and which is a great way to relate to other people. But both of those people need to change their mindsets. It's not about combining self-interest. It's about taking the self-interest out and realizing that they're equal. So sexual identity and these things, pronouns, there isn't a pronoun for someone who shits their pants because they have intestinal issues, but someone like that feels pressure and hates themselves. It's not about sexuality. Someone who has a huge birthmark here feels uncomfortable and feels a pressure with that has no pronoun. But there's people all over the planet that have these growths on their face that relate to each other, but they hate themselves in a similar way that people that grew up in a less understanding environment when it comes to sexuality. So I'm saying, we need to stop relating to people that like, well, hey, I struggle with my sexuality, so did you. Cool, we can relate. When someone else goes, yeah, I used to shit my pants for 25 years. Cool, because that's pressure too. That is a way we can relate to each other. And there are no pronouns for that. And so someone who had 6 siblings, and they were the youngest of 6 siblings, but they weren't paid attention to, and their parents were bored of parenting and all the magic was gone. They felt the same kind of pressure and exclusion that someone was going through with their sexuality in the 1980s. But we don't think about those people. We think about the people that went through the sexual identity. And I'm saying is, just because more people go through certain kinds of pressure doesn't mean it is more valuable or less relatable than some people that go through their own struggles. And every single person is struggling. So instead of all these boxes of what struggle applies, why don't we look at it all as struggle and pressure? And then we can all relate to each other. And then every box is just a different way of how we've all struggled with not having an answer for that insecurity. And those are completely different ways of looking at it, right? The people that are dyslexic, people who felt they couldn't read, people that are illiterate, they feel the same way that someone did 40 years ago that was gay. But times have changed, and so gay is more acceptable. But that kid who can't read off the board that everyone else is reading feels like the gay kid did 100 years ago, or whatever the case may be. So that's what I'm saying is, yes, we have all these different labels and concepts and nouns and examples of all this pressure. And I'm saying, let's stop focusing on what our subjective pressure is. And the objective is to understand pressure better, and understanding the physics of life itself is better than continuing to say, because like with the Me Too movement and all this stuff when it comes to the abortion and stuff, right? Like if 75% of the public and the voting electorate and everything is men, does that mean that men know more about reproductive rights than women? If it wasn't 50-50 in gender and statistics, would that change things? And I'm saying, somebody going through something and feel the pressure and feeling alone, that's part of this world, saying people thinking no one else has ever experienced what I'm going through. There is progress to saying, yes, look at all these struggles people are going through. And that's where I'm saying we should stop celebrating it and looking at the struggle itself and the pressure and how other things relate to it. because celebrating one person's struggle is ignoring someone else's struggle just because it's a little differently. And that's just a different way of looking at it that is original, as opposed to this is what the common answer is for respect right now. Respecting these boxes as opposed to evaluating. And I'm called an asshole when I evaluate what is the right answer. I'm looked at as inconsiderate, but that's because I say, okay, well, what if I didn't think about myself? I just thought about this in general. I took myself out of the equation. All of a sudden, I'm an asshole.
That's a privilege, though. That's a privilege in itself, because you have the privilege of doing that to a degree. Not everyone does. So, like,
that's what everybody does, though, or should. That's their imagination.
Yes, but we live in a world that caters to some people more than it caters to others. So if you are in a position where you don't have to worry about as many things and you're not in as much danger, it's going to be a very different experience where, like, for example, like when pronouns first became a thing, like in my mind, I was like, is this really necessary? Because I've always fit into the identity of being a woman. I've never felt uncomfortable with that.
Right.
I feel uncomfortable with the way that women are treated, but I've never been uncomfortable in what it means to me to be a woman. That being said, I'm in a very privileged position because I have friends who are non-binary and who just don't fit into any gender. They don't have the luxury of saying, well, I can just take my self-interest out of it and look at the bigger picture, because they still have to exist in a society that is constantly misgendering them, which fucks with their sense of self. And I think it's important to have a sense of self. You can't just completely bypass that and say, well, look at the bigger picture, take self-interest out of it, because you still have to exist as a person in this world.
Right. But my difference,
people, that's more difficult. You can't just say like everyone should just take self-interest out of it, because that's not the world we live in, and it's not safe to do that.
But it's not a nice world. It's not an empathetic world. But by saying we should try to be nice and be empathetic doesn't mean, like, that is acknowledging we have work to do. And so I just believe that by looking at how things could be better, as opposed to looking how things are, that changes our concept of self. So when you tell me self matters and the world matters, and how we act and interact in the world does not define my sense of self. Whatever binary words or whatever non-binary words, whatever society dictates is valuable and not valuable, whatever people think is hip and cool and attractive, it does not affect my sense of self. And that's where separating your self-interest from the world's value of yourself. So like I said, the world can change tomorrow. It doesn't change how I feel about myself. People can create new pronouns. It doesn't change how I feel about myself. People can completely have different epiphanies, can have different values, different principles, different religions, all of it. And everybody can disagree with me. Every single person on this planet can look at me and say, Matt, yada, 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 we don't value you. That doesn't change my sense of self. If anything, it makes me feel more comfortable about my sense of self, because nobody's allowed into my sense of self, and no one can change how I feel about myself. Only I can change how I feel about myself. And that's from a place of understanding. And so I don't compare myself with the world and looking down on myself if I don't fit in with the world. I think that's the opposite of what the mindset we need to have. And so we look up at the world when I think a lot of people shouldn't be. They should be looking at it like, how can we make the world differently, as opposed to how can we fit into the world better?
For sure. But we can't change the way that people treat us. All we can do is change how we respond to it.
Yes,
so
I love that. Agree.
And that's just it. Is what I'm talking about is the middle zone between where we are now and where we would like to be. Because what you're talking about is a beautiful reality that I would love to be a part of, but we're not there yet. And
but I am, though. That's the problem, is I'm there.
Are.
Right.
You are, but like, not everybody is. And you can't just disregard people who are in a worse position because like they're so out of what the default is.
Yeah, I never want to disregard anything. All I do is question people's self-interest and how they see the world and the way that they scale things and the way that they value things. And so doesn't matter what they say, I always find it best to go, okay, well, what if this? And often people will have a different take. When they're not part of the narrative, they see the narrative much differently. And when you start to change the values and change the variables, people's points of view start to change. And that's how you evaluate whether it's in one's own self-interest. And that's what I believe is the core of your sense of imagination. It's to be able to take yourself out of the equation. The problem is people use their imagination in a way that to aid their own insecurities, as opposed to looking at the world differently. And so I see the way I look at the world, and then I use my imagination to look at the world every other way but my own way. And I find it changes the way I see the world externally, and it gets brighter and it gets more relatable and more calm and more simple. And I think people are just right, but that's from a place of growth, right? It's a place of reevaluation. And so it never was like that for 33 years or 36, for over 3 decades. It was never that way because I had one mindset and I evolved that one mindset and I never reevaluated truly. And once I began to reevaluate, that's where my world changed like that. And I'm saying the world is the way it is because people don't know which direction to lean other than the way we're leaning. It's uncomfortable to retrace our steps, but the more we learn to do that, the more we learn which were the right steps and which were the wrong steps. Because I was told my whole life, be thankful for what you have, never reevaluate whether things could have been even better. All I think is, look at what you have, things could have been worse, without thinking things could have equally been better, because that's not in our self-interest to think that way. It's an insecure way to think this is the best it could be. And the world, if we took a different direction, it only would have been worse and I would have had less stuff. Ugh, I can't think that way. All I can think of is things could have also went differently in a better way if we had a different mindset. And that's what my imagination is for now, not replaying my same stories and my little trophies and my championships from when I was young and all the funny times in my college years and the drinking and the partying and all these things that people use their imagination for to make themselves feel better. I use my imagination to reevaluate my point of view and my own self-interest as well as other people's. So I don't disregard anyone. I just reevaluate what they tell me using the foundation of what they're telling me is what makes them feel the most secure or is in their self-interest first and foremost. And we all find ways to rationalize. Or not, who knows? But how's that for a good conversation?
Yeah, I think that was good.
Well, I don't know. Is there a timer on this sucker or what?
I think that was about 2 hours.
Wow. I think that was a great icebreaker.
Yeah.
Especially like I think us putting up those there's that nice like pressure back and forth for that little bit, right? When we're getting into these things, I think people are going to be really engaged in that. So I think very much so, like we're talking about the same things from that yeah.
It's interesting because we are talking about the same thing. It's just we see it from like completely different points of view. And it's like, I get everything you're saying. And I'm like, but what about this?
Yeah, I get it. And I wasn't making you mad. I was trying to kind of get a little bit of I don't know. It's fun to me. I hope that was all from a place of respect and humility and everything, because I really do care. And I relate more to people that struggle than people who didn't. And that's what I mean by my struggle might not have been the same as a lot of other people, but that's what helps me relate to those people. And I think people thinking that someone has to go through that to understand it, I think is part of what makes us feel alone. And I don't know. Anyway, pretty good for the first one. And I'm out of coffee.
Yeah, that was good. I know,
So,
me too.
So we'll I guess there's no real end to this, but this is just for us to watch it anyway. So
it never ends. It's just to be continued on the next one.
Right. I couldn't be more excited than I am right now. And I'll be more excited once we get off the call and I start processing. But
yeah.
How do you feel?
I feel good. No, this is gonna be a fun podcast to do.
Right? Fuck yeah.
And this is why I said, like, we're not gonna, like, this is why I was like, yes, let's do free form, because you and I can just talk for hours. Like, we run out of time before we run out of conversation. So
I apologize for walking on to
interesting.
you too. Sorry, I'm doing it while I'm doing it.
No, but I think it is interesting because we're on the same page and we're talking about the same thing. It's just we're talking about different ways to get there. And I think that's where perspective comes in, and that's what makes it interesting.
Definitely. All right. Well, why don't we I'm driving to North Bay tomorrow. I'm there for the weekend, our golf tournament and stuff. And so if you want to give me a shout if you want to debrief, or if you're doing stuff, or text me some other time, but I'm not going to be home for the next couple days. So hopefully I'm trying to, I want to finish that video next week. Stuff, but yeah, I'd like to do some type of little debrief while it's still fresh, and I'll send you this and we can watch it, or listen to it if you want, or whatever, just to get an idea, because I want to be better and more considerate and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll send you this and we'll go from there. All right. Sounds good. Thank you so much. You're awesome. Thank you. All right. Bye. Have fun this weekend. Oh, will. Definitely will. Take care. Bye.